that leads us to this new iteration of warfare, which is the cognitive domain. Essentially, it's a war of media, a war of ideas, and a war of attempting to divide populations against populations. Yeah. The thing to remember when you're sort of looking at these generations is it doesn't necessarily mean that one generation ends and another one picks up. These different generations of warfare can be happening simultaneously, but what matters is how technology and geopolitical aims end up affecting each other in order to change the nature and the character of warfare.
So can you explain the generation 1 through 5?
So first generation, basically anytime somebody decided to get their buddies together and go, fill a bunch of other strangers with holes for some geopolitical aim. So it could be anything from like early Neanderthal tribal warfare all the way up to sometimes the example that people tend to use are like the Macedonian conquests, where strategically you have a really high level of organization, but a fairly low level of technology. You've got dudes in lines marching with spears and
like tribes.
Yeah, but the Macedonian conquests were kind of the latter end of it. And they had shields and they could make a phalanx and they could stab each other in unison. Yeah. Which was a technological boon at the time. It wasn't something that we'd seen before. But again, it goes from technology to geopolitical aims. How do you marry those together in order to create this new character of warfare? So second generation, that kind of takes us up to almost the Napoleonic Wars. And at that point, you're looking at things like gunpowder, more advanced tactics. You've got decisive battles, but you also have entrenchment, right? So you have these wars of attrition that are made possible by this new type of technology. World War II is kind of where we start to change again, right? We've got more maneuverability warfare, and of course the nuclear bomb. Yeah. So now you're talking about the industrialization of war. So suddenly you're able to, absolutely like annihilate a battlefield, not only with industrialized weaponry from the sky, but industrialized weaponry that's being driven across the land. So if you think about Hitler's Blitzkrieg, that's sort of a good example of that maneuver warfare of the third generation of warfare. But as things go up towards the Cold War, we see this big characteristic change in how wars are fought. And obviously this happens because of the nuclear bomb. So at this point, we have the last iteration of great power conflict. But with the nuclear bomb, it becomes far too dangerous to have direct nation-state on nation-state violence, because at any point somebody could drop the world-ending weapon, or so we thought at the time. And so suddenly war has to change again because the geopolitical aims aren't completely annihilating the world. It's just to get strategic advantage over the adversary. In this case, it would be, the Soviet Union and the United States. So we go to proxy wars. We go to proxy wars and asymmetric conflict. So that can take us from basically the end of the Cold War all the way up to the global war on terror. And the global war on terror changes things massively because suddenly we have a unipolar world. Essentially, Soviet Union has fallen and the United States is able to project power all around the world. But we haven't been able to project power all around the world without making quite a few enemies. Right. And also training a lot of those enemies at the same time. So suddenly the global war on terror turns into really precise asymmetric combat with semi-state and non-state actors. So Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and the Islamic State. Name your insurgent group, your favorite insurgent group, name them.
Pick your flavor.
Right, exactly. But now we have something different happening. And that's fifth generation warfare. We still have the same constraints of third generation warfare. We can't go directly into combat with each other with these world-ending weapons. And in fact, there's so much economic entanglement in the world that it's very difficult to actually disrupt another nation so significantly because you're disrupting your own market. So that leads us to this new type, this new iteration of warfare, which is the cognitive domain. Essentially, it's a war of media, a war of ideas, and a war of attempting to divide populations against populations.
Yeah.
And to use the cognitive domain, essentially like the gray zone warfare in people's gray matter.
Yeah.
And to occupy the space between people's ears in order to achieve some sort of strategic gain. So a lot of what I'm looking at is, how does the United States work to shield itself from any attacks in the information space?
Yeah.
Because one of the biggest assets we have as a country is our freedom of speech, but that also leaves our information space massively open to any sort of incursion by potentially belligerent actors. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was this one psychological operation. I think the agent who did it was a guy named Ivan Agayants. This was in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And, he essentially had created this fake treasure trove of Nazi documents. They were all fake Nazi documents, and he dumped them into a lake in Czechoslovakia at the time. Mm-hmm. And then he hired, a real news team to unearth them and say, and so the goal was basically to sort of acknowledge some sort of complicity with the newly Western government, and say, hey, these guys were working with the Nazis. Granted, all of these documents were fake. Sometimes this is called Operation Neptune, sometimes called the fake in the lake.
What year was this again?
Oh, it was in the 60s, I want to say.
Wow.
If you want to read about it, definitely recommend Active Measures by Thomas Rid. Fantastic book.
Okay.
But he has this one, the Agayants has this one like absolute banger line in it where he says something like, it's great that they have freedom of the press. If they didn't, we'd have to invent it for them. And so it talks about this permeability of the information space where it's like, on the one hand, you're able to call out really terrible ideas and you're able to surface really good ideas in free dialogue. But on the other hand, it leaves the borders open for anybody to make an injection of information into that space.
Yeah, this is almost exactly what that Russian dude Yuri Bezmenov was talking about.
That's exactly
50s,
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which it seems like that's exactly that is like precisely where we're at today. Which
that's
is
right.
Exactly what he was talking about.
Well, and the Bezmenov speech is fantastic too, because one of the things that he talks about is the generational aim of these kind of active measures. Russia specifically tends to have a lot more time to do these things. They don't have administration switches nearly as regularly as we do. So they can
Dictatorships can make decisions way faster.
That's right. And they can also make more long-term decisions. I was reading a report, and I'm like having trouble getting it out of my mind because now it's the only way that I can sort of think about the Ukrainian conflict or really anything that's happening within the Russian Federation sphere of influence. And they were essentially saying that the psychological operation of Russia is really the locus or the center of the conflict, that kinetic conflicts are just ways of influencing the psychological operation. And so I know it sounds a little perplexing, but I think the information that they give, or the evidence that they give, is, their incursion into Syria at a certain point was everybody was saying, well, it's because they want a warm water port. Great. But what also came from that was a massive amount of refugee outflows from Syria that went into Europe. And this is, you can draw a direct line from that into this new wave of hypernationalism that is sort of drawing fractures in the European Union, because they're saying, well, if we're a European Union, then why are some countries bearing the brunt of taking care of these refugee outflows, and why are other ones able to not have that same burden?
Right.
And so in one respect, Russia benefits from the rise of autocrats in the European Union, and a fractious European Union too. And so we've seen a bit of that already. And so you might wonder, okay, well, what about the war in Ukraine? You have a slow encroachment into the war in Ukraine. 2014, is it? You really start seeing these gray zone operations where the little green men come into Crimea, and it's a sort of like a situationship of war zone. Like, are we at war? Are we not at war?
Right.
And it's testing the waters to see what will the result actually be. What actions is NATO going to take? And we're already seeing an enormous cultural divide, especially in the United States and amongst allies, about what do we do about this kinetic conflict. I haven't lived in the United States for a long time, but I've been back for 6 months, and maybe it's because I'm at a think tank where these things happen, or we have these conversations a lot. But I'm quite surprised to see how much division there is over funding or not funding the war in Ukraine.
Right.
And there's certainly a lot of gasoline being thrown on that fire, not only internally but from abroad. There are quite a few skeletons in the American closet, and they're really good at like playing the xylophone on those ribs, right? Yeah. One good example, and sort of famous example, I want to say it had a really cool operation code name. It was called like Infection or something. But anyway, this is one of the more famous ones, and it was during the AIDS crisis. There was they wanted to sow this story into the American media that AIDS was being generated as a biological weapon to affect marginalized populations in the United States. So what they did was they sort of smuggled a story into a paper, and I want to say it was India. And then that hit the international news wires because it was a story in India. It was really hard to fact check. And also it's a fairly sensationalist story. So it sounds really like it sounds plausible. It sounds exciting. And both of these things are big red flags when you want to like identify what is and isn't, a psychological operation. And then suddenly it ends up in the American news cycle. One of the big news broadcasters broadcast on it. I want to say Tom Brokaw, but that's like literally the only name that I can think of right now. Anyway, people ran with it, and it's a process of idea laundering. So you put an idea somewhere within some sphere of influence that has a direct line into the target community, and then from there you have a certain amount of well-known sources of information that seemingly vet that information. Then suddenly it becomes almost indistinguishable from the truth. Yeah. But it has a distinct effect on the American population. One of my favorite versions of this was, so they had the, I think this was Yevgeny Prigozhin's, he was the guy who...
Prigozhin, that was the dude that was working for Putin.
Yeah, Putin's chef.
He blew him up. He blew him out of the sky eventually.
He had a catastrophic airplane failure. Yep. Crazy. What
surface to air missile.
What? Yeah. They shouldn't have been flying that missile there. What bad luck. So he also had, I think it was called the Internet Research Organization. And the Internet Research Organization was the Russian troll farm, right? And I mean, it just sounded like you read reports from the people who were working in these troll farms, and the conditions sound brutal. Like, you've got to write something like 700 posts a day, either supporting or denying or just fighting with people online under the guise of, an American from Texas or whatever. And at a certain point, they were like, well, can we make things happen in the real world from online? And so they did this one operation that I just think is hilarious and brilliant, which was, it was called Free Hot Dogs. And they created an event on Facebook in Central Park in New York City that was just like free hot dogs. We're going to have free hot dogs in Central Park. There were no free hot dogs, spoiler alert. But what they did was they had a Russian active measures agent go and just like see who showed up. A lot of people showed up for free hot dogs. And so what they found out was they could now make people take real life action through online events. Now, this changed into full-on demonstrations. So there were these two groups that they were trying to get to fight each other. And one was called like the Heart of Texas, and then the other one was called like I want to say like USA Muslims, some sort of Islamic thing about Muslims in the United States. And they started essentially like counter protests against both of these groups, but both groups were operated by Russian troll farms. And of course, one group had almost had 250,000 people in it. The other group had 250,000 people in it. So suddenly you have real live division and an actual protest and counter protest that was being ginned up from St. Petersburg by a bunch of people posting. And now this process has gotten so much easier that it's insane with artificial intelligence and LLMs. You can have actual agents, not human agents, but LLMs running around the internet and just generating hundreds of thousands of posts for you.
That's wild.
There's a fascinating paper about this, and it was about a Chinese researcher who sort of predicted this. I can't remember. There is a RAND report on this. I think if you look up Chinese disinformation, then you can read the RAND report about it. But there's
a RAND report.
Yeah, most if not. Not all. I mean, there's certain classified RAND reports.
Yeah.
And then RAND reports that are classified and then eventually declassified. But I think you'd be surprised how, Chinese different. These reports are fantastic and they're incredibly dense. So yeah, they're all publicly available as well. I don't know if it's this one that talks about it, but there was a Chinese computer scientist who sort of saw the LLM, large language model AI, opportunity coming. And initially he was sort of laughed at and they were like, well, that's not actually going to be a thing. But he came up with the idea of these artificial intelligent agents, but he called them souls, right? So you would come up with a digital soul or an army of souls, but really what these were very realistic social media profiles that had, a full history, so you could sort of vet somebody's full history. All of these artificially intelligent generated imagery,
online accounts,
and then you would start having those accounts run around the internet and posting various things.
And LLMs were doing all this.
So that's what he predicted, and I think that this is something that we'll probably start seeing a lot more of, because it's so easy. A lot of the barrier to entry that previous generations of psychological warfare fighting had was legitimacy, right? Going back to that Operation Neptune, the fake in the lake, you think about how much they had to do in order to quote unquote uncover these Nazi documents, right? You had to have forgers work for months creating realistic fake Nazi documents.
Right.
They even went so far as to take the steamer trunk and artificially age it so that not only would the steamer trunk be able to hold these fake documents, but it could be identified realistically as something that was at that time period, not as a fake. And then you have all of these fake documents discovered by fake divers. In fact, Agi Jans was one of the divers, as far as I know. And then you have a real media team that shows up there.
Yeah.
So that's an enormous barrier to entry. Like, you have to have this army of forgers working for months to make sure that everything stands up to scrutiny. Now you have an artificial intelligence agent that can work, within a matter of seconds to sound plausible or to sound realistic. Then you can launder the idea through any number of different websites to make it sound as if this is somebody speaking from a measure of authority.
Yeah.
And so as the bar lowers to affecting the information space, it becomes easier and easier for both state actors and non-state actors to start messing with the information space of a country.
Yeah, if something sounds sensational enough or sounds logical enough, all it takes is one person to report on that story, no matter how reputable the original foundational source is. As long as there's a second source, somebody who reports on that, someone else might find that interesting, might make a video about that. Some other bigger reporter or content creator could see that and make a video that goes like really viral. And then once you get 2 or 3 sources removed, then it's just like a free-for-all. People aren't going to be going back to the original source to see if that was a Russian agent or a Chinese psyop.
Well, and
they're going to run on it because it's a huge story that's going to get them a lot of page views and make them a lot of money.
I mean, I've heard you dealing with this. Yes, I'm a fan of your show as well. So I listen to a lot of your episodes, but I hear you sort of struggling with this from time to time regarding like UFOs and Egypt stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You have so many different conflicting reports, and then there's so much information in the space, and the original sources are obfuscated from you and from anybody. I want to know where the UFOs are too.
Yeah,
this is something that some buddies of mine talk about at Rand.
You guys talk about UFOs at Rand?
Totally, yeah. We're like, I took I took a course on space stuff, and anytime like a new professor come in, we like, they know, they got it, they got to know. But then you also realize how stovepiped information is, and if anyway, so the thing that I think it must be really frustrating for you. And it's certainly frustrating for me when it's like, okay, I don't know how to vet any of this information because the information comes from a place of secrecy already. So anybody that's going to claim some authority, whoever seems the most convincing from that space of authority, I guess they're right. And then, when there's conflict in the space, it seems like everybody's just going to throw the other guy under the bus and be like, oh, that's a psyop. Right. That's CIA. They're little green men are CIA, but these aliens, like the Pleiadians, they're definitely like legit.
Right. Think about it like this. Imagine if a person like Joe Rogan would be a good example. I don't know. I'm sure he does quite a bit of background and research on his guests before they come in. Yep. But maybe there's one day where he was hungover or in a rush to do something, and he came across some article or someone forwarded him some Instagram clip of somebody talking about something really interesting to him, and he was like, "Oh fuck yeah, get this guy on the show." Right? And this guy comes on the show, talks about all kinds of crazy things that no one's ever heard of, or things that are blowing his mind that he finds super interesting, puts out the podcast, gets millions and millions and millions of views. Now all of a sudden, there's all these millions of other podcasts that are trying to get this same guy on their show. They don't have to do any. Joe Rogan had him on.
Yeah.
What other than the fact that this person's talking about, it's going to get you a ton of views and make you a lot of money. What other background checks do you need to do on this guy? Because he was on the #1 podcast in the world.
Yeah, because they've leveraged the authority of that platform, right?
Think how easy that must be for some. I mean, if there were Russian or Chinese or any kind of foreign agents doing that kind of work.
Well, you also, I mean, a lot of what I've learned in studying national security, at Rand, which I should say is a fantastic program, and like the teachers that we have are like, it's really cool to be in a room with people who think about this stuff at all times. But one of the things that you sort of consistently discuss is like cost benefit, right? I think oftentimes conflict is really fought on a spreadsheet first, which is how do you maximize the impact while also lessening the cost. And information space attacks just happen to be really cheap, and getting cheaper all the time. So long as you have access to that messaging surface or you have access to that point of authority.
Yeah.
And sometimes like the idea is, I don't care as much to change people's thoughts. I just care that they act a different way. So the thought can be any number of things. It's not necessary that you change somebody's beliefs. You just want them to act in a way that is strategically important to whatever your aims are. Palantir is it's a profit-making venture. And so part of their profit-making venture is they need to have a certain amount of customers. And the United States is a really good customer of that. Actually, I don't know, have you seen the new Palantir commercial?
No.
Oh, it's really interesting. Maybe
is it on YouTube?
I think so. Maybe you can look it up.
Oh, we gotta see this.
Because I think what the Palantir
does it start out with the idea of taking lives and saving lives is super interesting.
Is that what?
That's an Alex Karp quote.
Oh gosh. Oh, that I'm sure that make. Oh yeah, future warfare.
That's it.
So check this out. Okay, so this specifically, this swarming technology. Yeesh.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's fucking sinister.
This
Go to the I want to read the comments. What's the top comment of that video?
UFOs.
Please have them turned off. Oh, of course they have them turned off.
Cowards. Absolute cowards. So
doing Israel's dirty work.
This sort of philosophy, right, of like you have this enormous swarm. There's actually a paper that you can probably find called the Replicator program. So if you look at Replicator on the RAND papers,
Replicator program.
Yeah, Replicator, and it this is a bit of what we're seeing here, and what Replicator is the idea of attritable systems. So attritable systems are systems which essentially they lower the cost by having systems which are not the difference between attritable and another system would be an exquisite system. So an exquisite system would be something along the lines of aircraft carrier, this enormous multi-billion-dollar thing.
Yeah.
An attritable system would be a system that is like a drone, right? Something that like you don't want to lose it because you could reuse it, but if you lose it, it's not going to bankrupt you, right? And so all of these little drones that you just saw, pop out of this potentially fictional ship.
They look like little DJI Mavics, like little.
Right. And so the idea with Replicator is that you have this enormous cost imposition by using attritable systems against exquisite systems. That if you can kill, let's say, an aircraft carrier with a couple of drones that are worth thousands of dollars, you're essentially shooting thousands of dollars at billions of dollars.
Right.
And so in the war of the spreadsheet, it's clear who wins. And you can potentially bankrupt the opponent by doing that. And
so this is something that this is a paper that Rand put together?
It's right there, yeah. The Replicator program.
Is this similar to what Anduril is doing?
Yeah, Anduril is certainly working under this banner.
And for people who don't know, what is Anduril?
Anduril's I don't, would you even call them a startup at this point? They're a defense company.
Okay.
They're operating under a very different model than the traditional defense companies, if I can say traditional defense companies.
Is it similar to that company Y Combinator, whatever it's called?
No, Y Combinator is an incubator. So they just they give funding for startup ideas.
Got it.
But what Anduril does is they've taken a very different tack on creating defense products, right? So instead of waiting on what's called an RFP or like a request for proposal from the United States government, the United States government says, hey, we need a really cool drone that does X, Y, and Z. And then let's say traditional defense company like Boeing or Northrop Grumman will bid on that, saying, hey, here's what we think we can do with that. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to make what we think you need in the future, and you can pay us for it. So essentially trying to leverage their privatized speed and funding to create defense products that are that are easily able to be purchased by the United States government. Okay, and the idea is to speed up that process of procurement.
Okay.
Because as you know, the United States, and this is one of the things that I think is talked about quite a bit, and I've written some stuff about this for my newsletter, is that the procurement process is so slow that it is oftentimes really difficult for the United States to deal with things on the ground. A good example of this would be during the global war on terror. We had sort of this really recent past of Desert Storm. So Desert Storm was sometimes known as the very first space war, and the reason was we used we used what's Google Maps? You know.
GPS,
that's right. Okay. Yeah, so we use
which is made by DARPA, right?
Yeah. So we use GPS in order to locate various forces that were on the ground, and we used that for targeting, and we used it for command and control to great effect. Annie Jacobsen writes about this in her book too. So it was the very first space war. As we went into the global war on terror, the thought was we would be able to leverage this outsized technological advantage. I think in Annie Jacobsen's book, The Pentagon's Brain, they talk about having a battlefield that can see and hear at the exact same time.
Right.
So we had these enormous technological capabilities, and we still got bogged down.
This was a big part of her first Platoon book as well, I think.
I didn't read that one, but I love her work.
Yeah.
Shout out to Annie Jacobsen. I hear you're in Los Angeles. Let's hang out. But it was undone by IEDs. It was undone by, a couple pounds of fertilizer and an off-the-shelf cell phone.
Right.
And so study after study was done on how do we
guerrilla warfare.
Right. And this is fourth generation warfare, right? This is insurgent warfare. And so how do we get around these IEDs? And what you had at a certain point was you had the soldiers on the ground actually retrofitting their own vehicles with what they called hillbilly armor. And it was armoring that was going to protect them from the IEDs. And so let's fast forward maybe 4 or 5 years into the global war on terror. We know that IEDs are constantly taking the lives of American servicemen. They're outfitting their own vehicles with technology to potentially help them survive these attacks. And then 5 years later, the Department of Defense is able to give them the MRAP, which is armored specifically against IEDs. So the procurement process is quite slow.
Yeah.
And so companies like Anduril, companies like Palantir are taking a bet that if they're able to sort of leverage this, private funding, and two, the sort of Silicon Valley, let's look around corners and build for where the puck is going to be rather than where the puck is now, then we can potentially either win the wars of the future or stop them before they even start.
Right. If you have a lot of tentacles and a lot of arms out there basically testing shit that you would never even or people even coming up with theories like this drone thing,
right?
So having thousands of drones that are worth less than $100,000 swarm these ships that are worth billions of dollars and potentially take them out.
Well, and this is something that
that's
we're seeing.
Kind of a crazy theory.
Yeah, this is something we're seeing in Ukraine too. I mean, one of the
Did you see how much money we're spending on our new fleet of nuclear submarines?
I have no idea. Probably a lot, though.
Can you find that, Steve? There's we probably looked at this a few months ago, but there's a new class. They're calling them the Columbia class submarines, I believe. We had the Ohios.
Yeah.
And now they're working on the Columbia submarines, and I think they cost like $2 billion each.
Nuclear subs don't come cheap, from what I understand.
The new total projected budget for the Columbia class submarine is worth $109 billion. Oh, that was it. I thought it was more. So $109 billion for 12 subs.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable.
estimated the cost for the lead boat, USS District of Columbia, is estimated to be around $15.2 billion.
See, this is exactly what I'm talking about exquisite systems.
Yeah.
Obviously, incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And you can see this concept of attritability as it happened in Ukraine pretty massively, right? Ukrainian defenses were one of the first armies to defeat a navy without having a navy, right? The Russian forces weren't able to completely cut off Odessa because they had so many unarmed vehicles or unmanned vehicles that were able to take out boats.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so...
Was this stuff the U.S. gave them?
Actually, no. So there's the... it's something that the U.S. is, I think, currently looking at and learning from. But the forces on the ground, from what I understand, in Ukraine were really looking at what they could do natively, like what were their indigenous capabilities.
Yeah.
And one of those indigenous capabilities was not only having a decent amount of drones around, but was through the first-person view racing community. So there's like a drone racing community. Have you ever seen videos of that?
Oh, yeah. It's fucking nuts.
It's insane. So they had these first-person view racers that were clearly fantastic at flying drones. And then all they needed to do was 3D print little brackets to make sure that they could hold explosive devices. And those became the leading weapon and a new technological innovation that happened from the ground rather than from, some bureaucratic environment speaking down to the ground.
Yeah.
And so that's how they were filling the innovation gap. So it's certainly something that the United States has started looking into, but it's also something that I think everybody is paying attention to.
I'm sure you followed some of that USAID shit that's been happening.
Yeah, actually, I'd love to talk about that. I'm kind of read in on USAID.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I actually may come at it from a very different perspective. Because I've heard a lot about USAID, and I've actually worked with USAID on projects before.
Yeah, that guy Mike Benz talks about it all the time, and it's fascinating the way he talks about it.
Super interesting.
Yeah, and so he used to work for the State Department, I think.
He would have.
He was an analyst for the State Department.
Sounds right.
And one of the things I remember specifically him saying was how he was leveraging companies like Facebook, for example, to maintain their monopolies overseas.
Yeah.
And being like, we're only going to let you have your monopoly overseas if you agree to censor X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
Like, all kinds of shit like this.
Yeah. So here's at least my take on it. Okay. And I worked with USAID in a very different capacity than him. And so I was a Peace Corps volunteer, which is technically under the State Department. I was teaching English at an Albanian high school for 2.5 years. And as a part of that, I got the opportunity to go out to village schools, really, really remote schools, and give English lessons out there sometimes. So, there's a lot of need out there, and I try and go do English classes as far afield as I could. At a certain point, we had the ability to collaborate with a couple of the other NGOs and USAID, and then some of these other funds like the German Development Fund, which is called GIZ, and UNICEF. And the idea was, well, we're going to make a mobile library. And basically we have a big van, got a bunch of books in the van. We drive to one of the 42 villages of Tropoia every single day, try to hit 2 villages a day. And then like once a month, you get a English lesson and a book, and, we help villagers, right? This was my interaction with USAID. It was getting a couple dollars to put some books in a van and drive around to give books to kids, right? So when
Meanwhile, you're only making $100,000 a day.
What's that? Yeah, I'm making $100,000 a day. I think, what is the problem with China? I think they're doing great. It's gonna be really fun in the future.
Doing a great job.
Thank you. So that, like, my interaction with it was, like, we're giving books to kids.
Yeah.
And we got some funding to make sure that happened. And if you think that every single dollar that was going into USAID was these like malicious operations that are forcing governments to bend to the will of the United States. It certainly wasn't my impression of working with USAID. However, and I also know a lot of people who've ended up working with USAID, and you know they're all looking for work right now. So LinkedIn is popping. Oh wait, actually, hold on. I got to tell you about this other great Chinese psychological operation.
Okay.
Can we put a pin in USAID?
Yes.
This is a really fucking brilliant one.
Okay.
I just learned about it.
Okay.
So obviously, a lot of the federal workforce has been looking for work recently. China, and I think you can pull up a story about this from the AP. China has been starting consulting firms and looking to hire people who now don't have any federal work. Specifically,
shit.
Yeah, it's kind of brilliant.
Where did you hear about this?
AP.
Really?
Yeah, look it up.
Wow.
I mean,
so they're hiring people to work remotely?
Oh my gosh. Look at that.
Reuters too.
Reuters.
Exclusive. Secretive Chinese network tries to lure fired federal workers, research shows. Scroll down, let's read the summary. Zoom in. Researcher identifies a network of fake consulting and headhunting firms.
Yep.
Chinese embassy says Beijing respects data privacy and security. Firms list addresses that are empty lots and shell companies. Wow.
So the bet that Beijing appears to be taking is that somebody who has been a federal worker for many years, spent a ton of time living, working, and breathing federal government, is now not only out of the job but also looking for a salary and some professional stability that usually comes with federal workforce. And maybe, just maybe, they might have a bit of a chip on their shoulder based upon being fired. So what that could result in is picking up some really good information about what the U.S. federal government is up to. And again, it's not illegal to hire people without jobs. These appear to be, fake consulting firms and fake headhunting companies.
Right.
But it's not a kinetic attack, right? Anyway, I just remember that thing. But
that's crazy.
Isn't that amazing?
So if they're hiring them, what would they be doing? Do they give them a job and a paycheck? Is it just to make headlines and to create some sort of fucking internal dissent?
Well, I think if it's made headlines, that their operation isn't going so well. I think that if if I was them, I would want to hire them and have them make projects that could potentially leverage their knowledge of the federal government, so that I now have a good deal of knowledge about the federal government.
Right.
So like I said, there's a lot of people who've been fired from USAID. But anyway, so the USAID thing, I think people should understand a little bit about the modern history of USAID and how it changed. Basically post-Reagan. Originally, USAID was created, I think it was 1961 by Kennedy. And the purpose of this was to not only, distribute diplomatic aid, but to act as a branch of soft power on behalf of the United States State Department, right? I think that it is no secret that states use soft power in terms of here's a carrot instead of a stick. Every nation does that. In fact, I've even done that on behalf of Liberland. Like I distributed aid to the Somali nomads that were affected by Cyclone Sagar because we were trying to get closer with the government of Somaliland.
Right.
So it's no secret that happens. What happened during the Reagan administration was USAID changed from we are going to sort of implement different programs within countries and we're going to develop and launch them in-house. It changed to becoming a more privatized venture where USAID essentially becomes the pool of funds that private institutions and NGOs can requisition, provided that they are in line with whatever the initiatives of USAID are. So you have companies like Chemonics is one of them. I think they're still around.
What is Chemonics?
They're an international development company.
Okay.
CHMEONIX. I think. But and then you have smaller NGOs. And the bargain is basically like, you know, if you have, I don't know, I'll use Albania, but like if you have an Albanian NGO that is roughly working on what USAID thinks is not only good for the country, but also good for US relations with the country, then you can get some funding from USAID. In fact, I've worked on projects in Albania recently. Like there's a video game development festival that happens there every year, and they get a little bit of money from the U.S. Embassy to stimulate the video game development economy in Albania. Shout out to Game Jam Albania; it's a lot of fun. But that's because private companies, private individuals can requisition funds from that organization, so long as that they're in line with the granting. But what this also does is it opens it up to companies and even agencies that have less than magnanimous ideas about what they're going to do with that funding.
Yeah.
So I think, what's the gentleman who...
Mike Benz?
That's him, yeah. So he was talking about... was it intelligence agencies sort of leveraging these funds to make...
The State Department.
Yeah, to make sure that...
They censor stuff on the platform.
Sure. And so these are private companies who are using these funds in ways that are not outwardly magnanimous. They actually look more like insidious control of a country.
Well, it's not necessarily... Yeah, it's the State Department doing it.
But this is also something that I think is less top-down rotten core control than I've seen in the media. I think that there's a lot of good actors that have been funded by USAID. I mean, I've worked with USAID funded projects before.
Didn't Dua Lipa get money from them for Albania?
Did she? I have no idea.
Find the story.
No way.
Type in Dua Lipa USAID Albania. But apparently she got a bunch of money to inject some sort of Albanian some to talk about Albania in a certain way.
I mean, she is Albanian,
right.
So that would
well, she
sense.
is Albania, right?
Yeah.
Did you type in USA? Dua Lipa, British Albanian singer, songwriter, has been involved in discussions about Albania and her relationships and this relationship to Kosovo in 2020. She faced backlash over tweeting a map representing Greater Albania, which sparked controversy due to national implications.
Yeah.
But what does it say? Where does it come to the USAID stuff?
Do I have to make it like super bold?
I don't know.
I don't know. They're
I
censoring
don't think
us.
that's going to change anything, Steve.
Sparks. Yeah.
Anyways, Mike Ben said something about how USAID. Oh, you know what it was?
Okay.
She was one of these councils. What was it?
Oh, was it like a cultural ambassador?
It was like it was like Council of Foreign Relations, I think it was, or one of those things like the CFR.
Okay.
She was like awarded like the top fucking artist or something, and she went ahead and like talked to this council. But apparently she was like involved. I don't know. You can't find anything, Steve?
No.
I'm a huge Dua Lipa fan, but I haven't heard this bit. I think one of the things too is, you know, one of the reasons that I think people are also rightfully looking to
type in Mike Benz Dua Lipa USAID. You'll find something.
And then UFO.
And then Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bigfoot. We haven't even talked about the Albanian Bigfoot connection. I think that one of the reasons that people are also rightfully looking at USAID with a great deal of criticism is what is the extent of soft power, right? If you look at indicators of where violent armed conflict are going to happen.
Yeah.
One of the biggest indicators of that is low state-based institution. So some of the, there's a lot of organizations, OSCE, the EU, the UN, that are working on institution building in a country, right? And this could be anything from like making sure that there are regional town halls to making sure that minorities are represented in local governance to making sure that like there are there's equal representation of like different faiths in a country. Now, is helping a country building institutions that look not unlike democratic American institutions, is that overstepping our bounds? I don't think so, because I think that democracy is a better bet than autocracy is. That's my point of view on it.
Well, when you're spending billions of dollars on it and your country's spiraling into debt, and the people don't get to vote where their tax money goes, let alone it's going to all these NGOs who are funding all this crazy, subversive, ambiguous shit, like then that gets to be a problem.
So I think that I agree, like, and this is ultimately like one of those problems with taxation. Like, I wish every year I got a receipt for my taxes. Like, I bought, like 1/1600th of a Stinger missile. Awesome. I wish I like filled like 27 potholes.
I at least get a plaque.
Yeah, right. You get a portion of the Stinger missile.
Okay, here it is.
Yeah.
Dua Lipa and Taylor Swift, former U.S. official Mike Pence claimed USAID used celebrities to destabilize governments.
Wow, that's a big claim.
Benz claimed the USAID had trained musical artists, including Dua Lipa, Pussy Riot, and possibly Taylor Swift, to act as assets in spreading political narratives for statecraft purposes. He suggests that these efforts are part of a broader initiative to influence public opinion and destabilize governments. Ben said that celebrities who can be trained to spread desired messaging are actively recruited and used as network nodes. He cited NATO-linked initiatives, and USAID-backed music diplomacy programs as key drivers behind the efforts.
Yeah, so obviously there is music diplomacy, there's sports diplomacy. All of these things are, like, especially in the international development world, things that people talk about, even food diplomacy. One example of food diplomacy is the fact that the Thai government subsidizes Thai restaurants in the United States. Like, that's why there's a lot of Thai restaurants around. That's a legit thing.
Right. But Thai restaurants don't destabilize our government.
They don't. Yeah, yet. We've got to.
I can see how that could be a slippery slope, though.
Yeah, and so like, do I worry about overusing the subversive capacity of the United States in other countries? Absolutely. Do I worry about the U.S. identifying too broad of a target base and saying, hey, we need to make everybody exactly like us? Absolutely. I totally agree with those things. But at the same time, I like that there is an apparatus in the United States of giving aid. I like that there is an arm of our government that says, you know what, the way that we want to interact with the world is by helping them at times in which they are struggling as a country.
Yeah, but it's not aid, right? What does it actually stand for?
International development, American international development. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that's
international development.
Yeah. International. I mean, look, I was driving around Albanian villages giving books to kids. Like, if you can find some like mustache twisting pernicious means in that, good luck. But at the same time, like, I'm pissed off that there are these other more subversive, like, politically motivated actors that are using USAID dollars to potentially work against countries, because that means that everything is painted with the broad brush.
Yeah, right.
Of, well, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, and also to your question about like, should our tax dollars go here? So there is a real big benefit in helping to stabilize and advance the economy of a country, because then when it descends into violent conflict is less likely, right? There are countries in the world with less state development, with weaker institutions, with greater disparity between the very wealthy and the very poor. Those are the places that wars start. Those are the places that we may end up having to go into. And so if you want to pay for an education system or to, use the Peace Corps to go in and give English classes now, it means that maybe in 20 years, it'll be more robust when a geopolitical fluctuation happens and there is a potential that they'll go into conflict, right? And so paying now to help develop institutions may actually be a better investment, especially in a globalized world, and especially in a globalized world where oftentimes the United States has to use violent force in order to stabilize or to nation build. By the way, I for those listening at home, I did quote bunny ears on both of those words.
Spoken like a true USAID employee.
That's right. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. We're not employees.
So what is...
I'm just trying to get hired by a Chinese consulting factory.
That's next, bro.
If you would understand how hard it would be and how many people would have to work together in order to fake the moon landing, you'd realize it's easier to just go to the moon, right? Like,
Do you believe that?
I do, yeah. I think that I think that there, and I've had professor.
Why is the moon landing the one that seems to be the most kookiest? Like, if you believe in the moon landing was fake, you're a fucking crazy person. But you can believe all these other conspiracies, and people don't think you're out to lunch like that.
Oh, see, I disagree. I think
really?
I think flat Earth is the kookiest.
Oh, flat Earth is the kookiest.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
I think flat Earth is by far the kookiest, or like
flat Earth is the stupidest for sure.
Tartarianism. Do you know Tartarianism?
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's basically this sort of idea that there was a large chunk of history that was covered up by the powers that be. That were actually like 200 years of history that was covered up by, some shadowy cabal of the powers that be.
Right.
And that was because there was this group of people called the Tartarians, and they had 0 point energy.
Right.
And they had giants, and they had, all sorts of advanced technologies.
Yeah.
Frankly, as far as conspiracy theories is considered, it's one of my favorites because it's just so cool.
Tartarianism.
Yeah.
Interesting.
They talk about how certain towers were 0 point energy machines. And then some YouTube channel just has a slow black and white footage of something old and a really big door, and they're and see giants, and you're damn, that is a really big door. Story checks out to me.
Yeah.
Right.
Moon landing's definitely up there though with one of the.
It's up there.
You're stupid if you think the moon landing was fake.
I mean, I think that I try to have as much empathy as possible for fringe communities, because it's
So you said that a lot of people would have to keep the secret for the moon landing to have been faked.
Yeah.
How do you think it's more than the Kennedy assassination? As far as people that would have to know about it?
Damn. I think there would probably just be more people involved, because there's more people involved with with launching something into space. I mean, you've got.
Right, but they could have still launched They could have still launched the astronauts into space, right? And this never gone to the actual moon. Maybe only the astronauts and a handful of people that were involved in filming it or knowing about that stuff.
I mean, my official opinion is UFOs did both.
Yeah,
that's my the Tartarian UFOs did.
But
did
all
both.
the people in the command center, that were guiding the launch, they knew they were launching them out to space, and they still launched the astronauts into space, right? But the fact that they went to the actual moon, you could easily I think you could fake that without a ton of people knowing about it.
Wasn't there a movie that was made about that too?
There's a bunch of movies that are made about it. Yeah,
like a fiction movie made about that.
Oh no, I don't know.
Yeah,
a fiction movie.
There's some.
Can you find that?
Fly Me to the Moon. Isn't that a rom-com about them faking the moon landing?
Maybe.
I heard about it. Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard it's great.
But during that period of time, the Cold War, there was so much fuckery going on.
Yeah, well, and
Gulf of Tonkin, Kennedy's assassination,
and during the Cold
MK Ultra.
Right. Was it about that?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
What does it say? Fly Me to the Moon, a 2024 American historical romantic comedy drama filmed by blah, 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 written by blah, 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 blah. Okay, let me see what the idea of the story is. Okay. a NASA launch director set against the backdrop of an Apollo 11 mission. The story follows Jones and Davis as she is tasked with creating a false moon landing in case the actual mission fails. Wow. That's another good point.
Hollywood's telling us.
If they couldn't get, well, that's the thing though. Did they actually try? Is it plausible that they could have tried to do it and had a backup plan in case it fails and they can't do it? Because one of the biggest arguments for the fake, for the fraud is that they couldn't get through that radiation belt.
Yeah, but
the
that's
Van Allen radiation.
The Van
belt.
Allen, yeah, but that's a sort of fundamental misunderstanding of how the Van Allen radiation belt works.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's because yes, that radiation does exist there, but it's still in a vacuum of space, so you can pass through it, and it's not like you will be immediately irradiated. It's because of how thermodynamics works in space. So you can pass through it, but there is a heat signature there, right?
Yeah, but did we ever do tests sending like animals through the radiation belt and bring them back and test them and see how they did? Because I know the Russians did. They sent
sent
like
that
a dog and it died a couple days later.
I can't remember the name of the dog. But they also sent Yuri Gagarin up there, which is such a wild story. You know that Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, he actually...
they sent him up past the radiation belt?
That I don't know, but he was the first person to orbit space.
Yes, right.
Which must have been a wild thing for him. Literally the first dude.
Oh, God.
Also, he grew up in like a mud shack without lights, and he was the first person to rotate around the Earth and come back. Like, how incredible!
That's fucking wild.
That's actually one of the reasons that I think, like, when I think about how technology will advance within our lifetime, I think about Yuri Gagarin, right? Because Yuri Gagarin, he literally grew up in a mud house with no lights, and then flash forward a couple of years and he's blasting off and is the first person in space. Like, our version of, growing up in that like mud hut somewhere in Russia could be that like we grew up remembering, a time without the internet or without cell phones or something. But it's really hard for us to understand how exponentially technology will grow in our lifetime.
Well, look how exponentially all technologies grow. Right. Like look how crazy, how fast like AI has just evolved since it first came out. But the Apollo mission technology is literally the only technology in modern human history, that hasn't doubled since the time we created it. It literally disappeared. We haven't we went to the moon in 69 and from 69 through 73, and we haven't been able to do it since. It's the only technology that hasn't exponentially gotten better or like doubled in its capacity or its ability to.
Well, so there are plans to go back to the moon. I don't know if they're being scrapped right now. They
keep getting pushed back.
Yeah, if you look at Artemis, is it the Artemis Accords?
Yeah, I think they just push it to like March of 2026.
So the question right now is like, does Artemis go through, which is a transnational agreement to go back to the moon, or because Elon Musk has become so deeply entrenched in the current administration, are we just going full on straight to Mars? And obviously there are problems with that because...
Well, didn't he say we had to go to the moon first?
A lot of people have said that we have to go to the moon first. And the reason being is because, you need to have a sort of like a base of operations somewhere off of Earth.
Right. And Elon also said the reason they haven't gone to the moon is because they would need to refuel 9 times.
To go to the moon or to go to...
the moon.
Interesting. Sustainable presence.
So there's 3 Artemis missions. The first one's already launched.
Yeah, but it was unmanned.
Oh. Second one is scheduled for 2026. Yeah, third one.
April of 2026.
Yeah, and I mean, by sort of and there's also a lot of private space companies now. They call them new space. They're basically the startup space of space companies. And I've interviewed a couple of these people. It's really fascinating. Some people are building full-on space habitats now. I think that there's a company called Vast that's doing that. Some are creating ways of like storing material in space so that if you need it anywhere in the world, it can just kind of be dropped down to have on the Earth. And space as like an emergent field is super fascinating.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the sound of Earth from space?
No.
Steven,
What does that sound like?
Pull up the sound of Earth from space on YouTube. It's fucking wild,
What?
dude. It almost
I didn't
sounds
realize
like
it
you're
made
in
a sound.
It almost sounds like you're in the rainforest. The sound, yeah.
There's
wait till
like howler monkeys and stuff?
it's from like plasma fields.
Whoa.
Yeah, because there's no, you can click that, yeah.
This is the sound of the Earth's magnetic field.
Oh, whoa.
Oh, this isn't the one I saw. Go back. This is not the one I saw. This must be fake news.
This has got to be fake news.
Maybe that one. Try that one.
12 hours?
No,
12
wait,
hours?
No. That's
The rest of this podcast is just going to be
Earth
us
sound.
listening
Go
to
up,
Earth.
up, right there. You click that one for 11 million views or 1 million
There you
views. Oh, you just fast. You went right past it. There you go.
Oh, now I'm getting the rainforest feeling.
Yeah.
These sounds are generated by energetic particles in Earth's plasmasphere, which are being tugged to and fro by the rotation of Earth's magnetic field.
That's so wild.
You see, there is a plasmasphere around Earth, containing clumps of ions and electrons. As Earth and its magnetosphere rotate, the magnetic fields push through these particles, accelerating them in a wave called a plasma wave.
Honestly, I'd love to sit next
How
to this guy at
crazy
a
is
bar.
that?
Like, you just
That's good, Steve.
start explaining plasma fields to you.
Yeah, that's so weird. The other videos though sounded so different, right?
Yeah. Well, and then I think we also demonstrated, our own sort of appeal to authority here. It's like, well, this one's got 3 million views.
This
Clearly,
is the one I want to be right.
Like the English guy speaking at this point sounds like
Right.
clearly the most reasonable.
Right.
But it's like all English guys.
Yeah, for real. But also going back to the moon landing thing, how come the first guy who ever stepped foot on the moon, which is without a doubt the most profound, groundbreaking thing that humanity has ever accomplished on Earth?
Yeah.
He's only done, I think, 2 interviews, and the president had to ask him to do both of them.
Is that right?
2. And one of them was super cryptic.
Really?
Yeah, he did one for like the 20th anniversary in front of like a college class, and he was saying like, we have to break through the lies of our history or something like that.
Jeez.
So if you are the person who achieved the most amazing, astonishing feat of humankind, why have you only done 2 interviews?
Maybe he's
And
not.
the president, he says he only does interviews the president specifically asks him to do.
Yeah, it could be that he just doesn't like talking in public too.
Right, but wouldn't if you did
like-
if you accomplish something like that for the purpose of solidifying America on the world stage as far as like technological innovation,
It's just gonna
you
be-
would think they would want you to do more. You would almost have to be forced to be in the public eye a little bit more than that, right?
Yeah, a bit more. Yeah, I don't know. I spend most of my research on the Earth, but now I want to look into the moon more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, and also like, how
Pull up Neil Armstrong's interview in front of the class, in front of the college for the moon landing anniversary.
I think.
Wait till you hear this shit, dude.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
What the fuck does that even mean?
I don't know. I haven't spent a ton of time with space people.
Protective layers.
I've spent a little bit of time. I took a space course, which was pretty cool. But I think that one of the things that I noticed in terms of like talking with folks that are working on space or working, potentially in space in the future, is this, desire that we maintained the pace, that we had during the space race because funding fell off massively. Now the funding for NASA is minuscule compared to how much it was. I don't know if you can find it, but can you find the percentage of the U.S. budget that NASA was funded at the time of the space race versus now?
It was a lot higher.
It was an enormous amount, and
but now a lot of that funding is going into SpaceX and other private companies.
Yeah, it goes into SpaceX, and then of course there's not we. I certainly haven't been involved in privatizing space, but there are private space companies that have demonstrated that you can create profit out of space. You've got
tourism.
Yeah, tourism is coming up. Small satellites for bespoke purposes, and this is actually one of the issues that we're starting to see more and more, which seems like, yeah, look at that. So 1960s to now.
60 billion that's worth dollars in 2020. It was worth 60 billion a year. Where does it say what it is now?
So around 4.4% in the 1960s, and then
0.5 now.
Yeah,
right.
And so you imagine what,
but also a lot of that money has gone to private companies.
Right. Yeah, and private space is now more open for business.
Google this, Steve. What was the memory on the NASA Apollo computers? The I think it was their guidance computers. Computer memory.
Yeah, there we go.
It was just like an original Game Boy.
4 kilobytes of RAM.
Wow.
4 kilobytes
yeah,
of RAM to get to the moon.
Core rope memory. Incredible.
And it's also just convenient that all that technology disappeared because you know what their excuse was?
What?
Why they don't have any of that Apollo technology anymore? Because they accidentally wrote over the hard drive.
So they were playing Doom.
Yeah, they had to download the new Doom.
Yeah,
and they
exactly.
they actually did an
worth it. Fair. Totally worth it. That was a great game. It really changed the landscape for everybody.